Hi, I'm Whitney.
And I'm Camden. Welcome to Ghosts and Garnets, Murder in Idaho.
Episode 11.
1-1. I can't believe it either.
So amazed. So guys, I have to tell you, if you are on the fence about having children, this is the episode that's going to put you firmly on the no thank you side of the fence of parenthood.
True enough. Touche.
Yes, today we are going to be telling you the story of the murders of Diane and Alan Johnson. This is a really stellar example of why you should not decide to murder anyone before your prefrontal cortex has been fully developed in your mid to late 20s.
Because you're still a dum-dum. Until that happens.
Yes, yes. You do not have the ability to fully comprehend life choices when you are 16 years old and in love with a drug dealer.
Bozo. Think things through. Think things through.
They can't.
Well, I know.
They can't at
this
16.
is what I'm saying. They cannot.
You see 5 feet in front of you. That's it. God. You know, I was trying to remember what the boys that we like looked like at 16 years old.
They looked like children.
No, I don't mean that. I mean, like, what kind of people were they? And I'm pretty sure that they were delinquents.
But not like delinquent. Without getting too far into it, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I suppose I wasn't terribly well behaved either. I didn't kill anybody, though. So,
same here. Winning.
Yes. So we are going to be talking about parricide today, which is when a child kills their parents. And strangely enough, it's usually boys who do this. There's only,
yes.
I think, I read in like the last 25 years, there's only been 4 cases in the U.S. where a female child.
Only 4?
To her parents. In the last 25 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Girls rule, boys drool.
Can always count on you.
We just hide our mental problems better, I guess.
We just shove them down deep.
Real deep.
All right. Buckle up, ladies and gents. We are taking a trip to Sun Valley, Idaho.
Oh, it's
gorgeous.
Pretty there.
Beautiful.
Bruce
land
Willis.
Of Bruce Willis. Yes.
My boyfriend. La la. It's fine. Jacob knows all about it.
Listen, I think Bruce Willis is an everyone kind of love, frankly.
You think?
I mean, I've yet to meet anyone who does not enjoy Bruce Willis.
Well, you guys get out. You bitches get out of the way. This is my man.
It's quite attractive. Anyway, it was Labor Day weekend of 2003, and Linda and Jim Volvold had traveled to Bellevue, Idaho, which is just right on the outskirts of Sun Valley. Sun Valley is really like a little chain of teeny tiny towns. They're all gorgeous. It sort of ends in Sun Valley with a big ski mountain and stuff. But Bellevue was right outside of there. And they were going to spend the holiday weekend with Linda's younger sister, Diane, and her family. Diane and her husband, Alan, had been happily married for 20 years, and they were the parents of 2 kids, 16-year-old Sarah and 22-year-old Matt. Now, Matt was not biologically Alan's son, but Alan had raised him as if he was. So they had a beautiful home, and by all accounts, were a happy family. Diane was described as inquisitive and thoughtful, with the ability to make everyone happy. Alan was known as an honest and straightforward man with a successful landscaping company. They were known in town for their parties they threw and were very well liked and well respected in the community. So after arriving at the Johnson home, Linda and Jim were filled in on the latest happenings with the family. These included updates about Matt, who was currently a student at the University of Idaho, and some troubles they had been having with Sarah. Sarah had been dating a 19-year-old high school dropout and small-time drug dealer named Bruno. Diane and Alan did not approve, and this led to some massive fights, one of which had escalated to a physical altercation between Diane and Sarah that had ended with Alan having to break up the fight between them. On Saturday morning, Alan and Diane found out that Sarah had not spent the night at a friend's house, as she had told them. She had stayed with Bruno, and Alan and his brother-in-law Jim drove over to the apartment that Bruno lived in across town. They parked behind Sarah's car, and Alan knocked on the door. When Bruno answered the door, Alan told him in no uncertain terms that he was to stay away from his 16-year-old daughter, and if he didn't, he would be reporting him for statutory rape to the police, and also he threatened to call immigration because he knew that Bruno was in the States illegally. They then brought Sarah home. The rest of the weekend was fairly uneventful. They dragged Sarah to some antique sales around town where she pouted in the car and refused to engage with her family.
Sounds about right.
And then on Monday, which was Labor Day, Jim and Linda headed home to their house just outside of Boise. What they did not know at that time is that their family and their lives would be forever changed only one day later.
Early the next morning, neighbors of the Johnsons were awoken around 6:30 a.m. by pounding on their door. They found Sarah Johnson hysterical on the porch and called 911 after she told them she had heard gunshots in the house and she thought her parents had been shot by intruders. The Blaine County Sheriff's Department was dispatched to the home and walked into what Sheriff Walt Femling described as the most disturbing crime scene he had ever seen. They found Diane in bed and Alan lying on the floor between the bathroom and the bed, clearly having been shot as he exited the shower. Diane had been shot at close range in the head. The amount of blood and tissue found in the room's hallways, and even as far as the walls in Sarah's bedroom, was overwhelming. He said, quote, "There was blood and hair on the carpet. It was on the ceiling. It was on the walls. There was part of a skull cap in the hallway." Investigators found a .264 caliber rifle leaning against the wall of the bedroom and 2 large kitchen knives put on the floor at the foot of the bed, and one in Matt's bedroom. After determining they had a double homicide on their hands, Sheriff Femling immediately closed down the street and in doing so stopped a garbage truck that had just made its rounds. Inside the Johnsons' garbage can that had not yet been collected, they found a bloody pink bathrobe, a left-handed leather glove, and a right-handed latex glove, all covered in blood. Seeing the crime scene photos from this is truly disturbing. Like the picture from the mother.
I watched a 2020, and what was the other one?
It was like...
There's a million.
Forensic Files.
Yeah, it's been on all of the shows.
Everywhere.
And I did not realize how high-powered a rifle this was. This is a hunting rifle. And these people were shot at very close range in an enclosed space. And it is gruesome. It really is the amount of trauma that these people went through. It's just horrifying. Ugh. And the fact that the sheriff caught the freaking garbage truck before they took the trash.
That is insane.
I know. I mean, how lucky is that? That's insane.
Yeah.
It would be so tainted and so...
Well, it'd be gone. They might not have ever found it. Right.
Yeah.
But we'll get into that.
Yes, we will. So as the news made its way around town, family and friends began arriving at the house. Matt, having heard the news up at school, had driven down from the University of Idaho and said in one of the documentaries how he pulled down the street and saw the hearse by the back door of their house, and how that was like the first time he realized that it was actually happening. This was actually happening. So everyone investigators talked to at the scene immediately pointed their finger toward the boyfriend, Bruno. And since he conveniently arrived at the crime scene to comfort his girlfriend, Sarah, they took his DNA to send off immediately. The murder weapon, which was the gun in the bedroom, was quickly identified as belonging to Mel Spiegel, an electrician who was a longtime family friend who rented out the guest house on the family property. Now, Mel's alibi was quickly established. He had been in Boise for the entirety of the holiday weekend visiting family, and he had not yet returned. This is so disturbing. As the bodies of Diane and Alan were being removed from the home, the sheriff noticed Sarah sitting on top of the fence that surrounded the property. And he was sort of shocked because he said he watched her just coldly and calmly stare as the bodies of her parents were brought out of the house and put into the hearse. And she had no emotional reaction at all to it. So he was not the only investigator who noticed Sarah's behavior. And he said to his team, there's something going on here. I mean, most 16-year-old girls would be hiding. They would not want to sit there on a fence and watch their parents come out in body bags. No way.
Police began interviewing people that knew the family, and they found out that not only was Sarah dating Bruno Santos, she had shown her friends at volleyball practice an engagement ring and told them she was going to marry him. Police learned that Diane and Alan thought Bruno was arrogant and dangerous and had tried to put a stop to the relationship on multiple occasions. Sarah's friends were also becoming suspicious. Her grief wasn't present most of the time, didn't appear genuine, and she seemed more concerned with hair and nail appointments. Sarah's friend Shantae Cottle told police that during volleyball practice, she, quote, came up to my side and she said, Shantae, find Bruno and tell him that I love him no matter what happens. And the girl said, and when she said that, it was just this awful feeling and her heart sunk and it was just like she did it. Police also wondered if Sarah had some part in the killing of her parents, and after hearing about the heated arguments she had with them, investigators took her fingerprints and DNA samples and questioned her. Though there was no evidence to corroborate her story of a break-in, Sarah stuck to her story about an intruder who'd committed the murders. Sarah went to stay with her aunt and uncle Jim and Linda, which would prove to be an increasingly difficult situation because as days became weeks, they both began to suspect that Sarah had been the one to shoot her parents. That would be terrifying.
Impossible.
Impossible. Could you imagine? I would never sleep.
No.
The forensic evidence that came back from the lab showed that there was no match to Santos. The pink bathrobe that police retrieved from the trash had high-velocity blood spatter from both Diane and Alan Johnson. Plumbers recovered the shower cap, which had been flushed down the toilet. By mid-October, 6 weeks since the brutal murders of Alan and Diane Johnson, the wait was finally over. The DNA evidence was back. Sarah's DNA was inside the glove. Convinced they had the final piece of forensic evidence in place, investigators questioned Sarah one last time, hoping for a confession. She would not budge. After 45 minutes, Femling arrested the high school junior on 2 counts of first-degree murder. Sarah's grandfather, Dean Dishman, remembers talking to Femling about the case. He said, I finally just asked him, "Walt, who pulled the trigger? Was it Bruno?" And he said, "No." And so I said, "Then who?" And he said, "Sarah."
Ugh. Like, you lose your daughter and you lose your son-in-law, and then you have to come to grips with the fact that all of the evidence is pointing towards your 16-year-old granddaughter.
Right, and your grandson's life has been shattered. I mean...
Oh my God, poor Matt. Yeah, and he was saying in the documentaries, Matt, the brother, that when he got home, he was trying so hard to believe her.
Yes.
He wanted so badly for her to not have done it. And that was like the one last piece of his life that was
still intact. Right. Mm-hmm.
Even though he, thought that she was a pain in the ass teenager, he really tried to believe her story.
I cannot imagine what that would be like. Yeah.
So we're going to talk about the trial. It began February of 2005, and it was in Boise. Lead prosecutor Jim Thomas believed that his team had the forensic evidence to convict Sarah, but worried whether they could prove that this seemingly normal high school student had just out of nowhere decided to murder her parents. So first up to testify was Bruno, who did not love Sarah enough to get involved in this shit.
This is the smartest thing Bruno has ever done.
Bruno was like, no, sir. I had nothing to do with this. And what's crazy is that this defense attorney, Robert Pangburn, he was a court-appointed defense lawyer. His sort of argument was that Bruno had either killed her parents or that he had hired one of his drug-dealing thug buddies to do it for him. One of his associates.
Like he's a drug lord.
He's 19 in Sun Valley, Idaho. Okay, he's probably selling skunk bud.
Out of his sock drawer. Right.
So even though this guy argued that Bruno was responsible and that Sarah wasn't responsible, he chose to not cross-examine Bruno Santos on the stand. And even the judge said, because he said, we've decided not to cross-examine this witness. And the judge said, ever? And he said, no, Your Honor. He didn't ask this guy who he was blaming it on a single question. I still don't understand.
Do you think that it was because he knew that it was complete bullshit and that if he continued any questioning with this kid that it would just get worse for him? I mean, that's the only thing that I can see logically why he would not want to question him.
The only thing I could think of, because this guy, it becomes very clear, he doesn't give a shit whose feelings he hurts, this lawyer. But the only thing I can think of is that he knows that this case is so weak, he's setting it up so that it looks like she had ineffective counsel or something because he didn't cross-examine this very important witness. I don't know. It's very strange to me that he did not question Bruno at all. So then Matt testified. This is heartbreaking, his testimony. He testified that Sarah was overdramatic, intended to stretch the truth when it suited her, but that he loved her. He spoke about the relationship between Sarah and their mom, that it was rocky and constant fighting, constant bickering back and forth, that it was getting progressively worse. And then this defense lawyer got up and cross-examined her brother. He asked Matt who would receive Sarah's portion of their parents' insurance money if Sarah was convicted. And Matt was like, I guess me?
Such a dick.
What the fuck, Bob? Why are you going after Matt? Then came the jailhouse informants. There were many. I got to tell you, I don't know how I feel about a jailhouse informant.
You never know.
Yeah. The prosecution brought in one of Sarah's cellmates, convicted drug trafficker Melinda Gonzalez, who revealed that during their conversations, Sarah seemed to have inadvertently confessed. Gonzalez and several other witnesses who spent time in custody with Sarah testified that she freely volunteered details about her rocky relationship with her parents, particularly her mother, and of her acrimonious relationship with relatives in the wake of the murders. She said she'd have knockdown, drag-out fights with her mom because she favored her brother and would give him anything. She loved her dad. She was a daddy's girl. She said her father had changed the life insurance and she was going to get everything because her brother was not really his kid. Another one of her former inmate buddies said Sarah claimed her brother Matt refused to post her bond even though he had the money to do so. She pretty much despised him because after the murders, he spent the insurance claims on a Suburban and a house and getting married while she was in jail. Another inmate, Novetta Hartman, who spent 10 days with Sarah, said things were not much better at her aunt and uncle's house. She talked about how her family had kind of dismissed her, and when she was living with them, they tapped her phone and conned her into going to the burial so they could arrest her. Hartman testified that Sarah's parents seemed to be the least of her concerns when she was in prison. She said she was upset a couple of times because she went to court and it wasn't on TV. She would say, it should be on TV. And then when the case was actually going, she was upset she couldn't wear regular clothes and had to wear her oranges. Her oranges is apparently slang for her jumpsuit. Now we know.
Now we do know. Things I never knew I was gonna know.
Her oranges. Oranges. I like oranges better.
You would.
It's cuter.
Sarah's friend and volleyball teammate Shantae Cottle also testified in the aftermath of her parents' deaths. Sarah seemed more concerned about Santos. She said she couldn't call me because she was under surveillance, but she told me to find Bruno and tell him she loved him, said Cottle, who admitted she never fulfilled her request. Grody. Cottle said that the day after the shooting, Sarah attended volleyball practice, where someone asked about the possibility of an inheritance. She said she and her brother would be taken care of for life, but she said she wished she could get an apartment now because she didn't like the people she was going to be living with. Cottle also said Sarah bragged about having sex with Santos and said that they were engaged to be married, a claim Sarah denied in her statements to police. Diane's sister Linda also ended up on the prosecution's side as well. When we would be discussing Alan and Diane, and someone would be upset, Sarah would roll her eyes and act disgusted. At her parents' memorial service, she said her niece seemed more concerned with who was there and asked to attend a volleyball game later that evening. Linda also testified that the day before the service, she overheard Sarah telling someone in the beauty salon where she was getting her nails done that she wanted to, quote, get on with her life. Linda also described a dream Sarah recounted to her while staying in their home. She said she was walking into our home, but when she got inside, she was in her home in Bellevue. She said she could see her mom, but she could not see her face, like it was digitally blocked out. She said her dad was also there, but his chest was blocked out, also digitally. She said she wanted to hug him, but she couldn't because she didn't want to hurt him. He said to her, "You can't hurt me now." Linda testified as the defendant, dressed in a light blue argyle sweater over a collared shirt, quietly sobbed. When asked if Sarah had ever talked about insurance money, Linda replied her only concern was that her brother Matt was getting everything and she's not getting anything. Nothing sounds more like a spoiled-ass 16-year-old brat than this whole thing.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. I mean, the whole thing is just ridiculous.
Well, you know, I have a niece, and I'm trying to think, like, in 12 years, could I even imagine, I mean, getting to a point where you love this child, and this child's not yours, but, I mean, like, I love my niece as much as I love my kids, and having to look at this person that you've known since they were born and have loved since they were born and think, oh my God, you shot your mother in the face. And when your dad heard it and ran out of the shower, you shot him in the lung.
Yeah, somebody who you thought you knew that you do not know at all.
Yeah, and I mean, the trial, I cut a lot of the trial out. The trial went on for 6 weeks. It was significant. And the judge Sarah couldn't figure out what her shtick was going to be. So she was either very emotional and the judge had to be like, calm the fuck down, or she was stone-faced. She couldn't find a happy medium.
In her acting.
It's that front of the brain thing again. Judgment.
Well, also, what did she think was going to happen? She's 16 years old. She thinks she's going to get this inheritance money and just get married, move into her own little apartment. I'm sorry, madam.
She thinks that she's going to get $680K in insurance money and marry Bruno, and they're going to have this fairy tale life together.
Well, I just wish somebody would have told her, or she would have learned along the way, that that is not what happens to a 16-year-old when they get an inheritance. FYI.
I think she forgot she was 16. So forensics is a massive part of this story. Clearly, with the amount of blood in this situation, there's not a prettier way to say it, whoever committed the crime would have been covered in it. So the defense's strategy was, he kept saying, no blood, no guilt. No blood, no guilt. Well, the prosecution said whoever had worn the bloody robe had put the robe on so that it was on backwards. Mm-hmm. So the person was covered from neck to feet with this robe. Then they were wearing gloves. There was a shower cap found flushed down the toilet that they think she covered her hair with. So all she would have had to do is wipe her face off before running to the neighbors. So this no blood, no guilt thing is
weak,
irritating, but we're going to go through it. So Robert Pangburn argued that the fact that Sarah had no blood on herself proved she could not have possibly pulled the trigger. Then he said this, which, if you have a weak stomach, maybe fast forward 10 seconds. He said, quote, her mother's head literally exploded in a spherical fashion. The gun itself had blood on it, yet there was none on her, absolutely none. He also tried to get this reenactment that he had put together in as evidence, where he had a dummy set up as the shooter, and he had a coconut filled with fake blood, and the dummy shot it in a bed so he could show how much gore would get on the shooter. The judge did not allow his film to be entered as evidence. Jesus, this poor family. The defense called a retired Oregon State crime scene tech named Rocky Mink to bolster their no blood, no guilt argument. Mink testified that based on the splatter patterns he observed in the crime scene photos, he would expect the shooter to be covered in blood. I concluded that the shooter was in such proximity to the explosive environment that produced misted blood that he would have either had blood spatter on their person or on his items of clothing. When Sarah went over to the neighbor's house, she was in her jammies. So, as we said, she was wearing a floor-length bathrobe over her stuff. And it's not like they tested every inch of her jammies. They tested pieces of her jammies. I don't know. It could be that I just very, very, vehemently dislike her, and I think this whole thing is a waste of time. But I suppose it doesn't matter what I think.
It matters to me, Whitney.
All right. That's all that matters then. So other witnesses, however, implied that Sarah Johnson just may have cleaned up after shooting her parents and before running across the street to her neighbor's house, which makes quite a bit of sense to me. Then the defense called the only two witnesses in the trial who characterized Sarah as a caring and loving person. Sarah's legal guardian at this point is a woman named Patricia Alder, and she had been Sarah's daycare teacher and sort of family friend for a while. And she had petitioned for custody of Sarah after she had been arrested because Sarah didn't want to have anything to do with her aunt and uncle at that point. So this woman had legal custody, but Sarah was in jail. So she testified that she was there because she believed Sarah was innocent and that she loved her. She testified that Sarah had a great relationship with her father, probably better than with her mother, and that Sarah loved her parents. Family friend Margot Ross said she entrusted the care of her 3 boys to Sarah Johnson and considered the Johnson family, quote, dear to her heart. She also said she observed a normal relationship between Sarah Johnson and her parents, but conceded that the only time that she actually saw the Johnsons was in social settings. After a 5-week trial, Sarah's fate was in the hands of the jury. All of her family at this point is convinced of her guilt. The jury deliberated for 11 hours and found Sarah guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder and 2 counts of using a firearm in committing the crimes.
All right, so now we'll get into the sentencing. In determining a sentence, the court appointed a Twin Falls psychiatrist to evaluate her. Dr. Richard Wurst evaluated her for 9 hours. He said, I did not find anything in the data I collected that there would be anything indicating that she would be prone to violence. Wurst pointed out that living in jail for the last 2 years has already affected the development of this still growing young woman, but the crux of Wurst's evaluation was that Johnson did not admit any involvement in her parents' deaths. He said, I tried to discuss the killings with her, and she said she did not commit the killings. She did not admit to anything. Until she admits to the crimes, there will not be a way to treat her. Assuming she did do the crime, at some point she'll admit to it, and there will be grist for the mill, so to speak, he said. Well, assuming, I think they found her guilty, sir.
Mm-hmm.
At the sentencing, family member after family member requested that the judge give Sarah the maximum sentence. Her attorney argued for a 15-year fixed sentence. In the end, 5th District Judge Barry Wood sentenced Sarah to 2 fixed life prison terms, plus 15 years for shooting and killing her parents. Wood talked for nearly an hour about the rationale behind his ruling. Most of the time, he addressed the shackled Johnson eye to eye. He said, you had it all. You had a nice family, nice school, car, freedom. You had it all. In the final analysis, you had lots of options. You had all kinds of ways to not go down this road, and yet you elected the worst possible courses of conduct. And it's the most devastating, harshest option. I have searched, and I can find no rational basis as to why your parents were killed, he said. Your family members have testified that they are fearful of retribution because they have given you a reason by testifying against you. No one saw this coming, Wood said. All of those things, in my mind, contribute to a significant risk of danger. A lesser sentence would trivialize these 2 lives. Society cannot tolerate and will not tolerate a child rebelling against their parents and killing them, the very people who are trying to protect you. There's only one story to be told here, so to speak, and it's sad. These days, Sarah still denies she murdered her parents. Bruno has been in and out of prison for drug-related charges since the murders, most notably serving a 10-year sentence for selling meth to an undercover police officer. He received parole in May of 2018 and could face deportation to Mexico, possibly in 2024, which the Idaho Department of Correction lists as his sentence satisfaction date. So I watched the forensic files on her case, and what it sounded like was that the robe was the huge forensics break in the case, because when they finally decided to test the back of it, because she was wearing it backwards, right? That's where all the microscopic blood was that they found. And it was microscopic. He said you couldn't see it.
Yeah, it was a mist.
Crazy. And if that had not been found for that police officer stopping that garbage truck
I know.
Who knows where this case would be? Because she tried to, in the documentary, she went into it a little bit more about the family friend that was renting out the room from them in the building. And she also, the reason that she put the knives where she put the knives was to get her brother Matt to look like a suspect.
Well, she had like a 12-prong approach to who she was going to try to blame this on. So the knives were supposed to be gang somehow, and then
in Sun Valley,
a knife in Matt's room.
Yeah,
maybe Matt did it, and then she took the gun from the renter's house to like frame him for it. And her aunt was saying that after they had come home from like the antiquing and Sarah was all pouty, she asked her mom for the key to the family's gun cabinet. And her mom just was sort of like, oh, ask your dad. I don't know.
God, isn't that...
Uh-huh. And then she just was like, oh, I'll just go get the renter's gun. I know he's got guns in there. And he's gone.
Man, that is... What's the word I'm looking for? It is... chilling? It's chilling that she asked her mom for the keys to the gun cabinet. Like...
Yeah. And you wonder how far in advance the forensic files in the 2020 were like, she was a fan of true crime. And so she thought she could get away with it. And I was like, somebody listened to a lot of true crime. I don't think they would come up with this plan.
Same.
It's not a solid plan.
For
Maybe
sure.
in her 16-year-old brain, she thought it was a solid plan. And the reason I keep talking about brain stuff is because it's so fascinating to me that up until recently, even scientists didn't realize that the front of your brain, your prefrontal cortex, where judgment and forward thinking and critical thinking skills and all of these things that are super important in decision making, that part of your brain is not fully developed until your mid to late 20s.
Yeah.
And so choices that you make as an adolescent, you don't have the capacity to understand that things are going to, whatever choice you make now is going to have consequences very far in the future. And this is not to give her any slack because she's a monster. It's just this like immediate gratification.
Right.
I'm pissed off. I'm going to shoot my parents so I can run away with my boyfriend and no one's going to know. And I'm just going to have all of their money.
And live in an apartment with Bruno. And have all of his criminal babies. God.
High school junior, you know?
What were we doing as high school juniors, Whitney?
Not killing our parents.
Well, it's for sure not
we
that.
We were not doing appropriate things, but it was, I think, probably more appropriate than, planning it.
Feels quite a bit more innocent now. I mean, when you put those up together, like, we were basically saints.
I feel like your mom should apologize for being mad at us.
I think she should too. Let's talk to her.
Okay.
I think she should apologize to us for calling your mother that one time when we came home and getting you grounded for 2 weeks, and I was only grounded for 1 week.
Oh, Idaho. I'm taking you way back, guys. On August 17th, 1925, James Whitaker was given a conditional pardon for the murder of his mother that he had committed 13 years prior. Now, the reason I'm telling you about this, Jimmy Whitaker, is that when he committed this murder, he was 11 years old. His mom had asked him to help her with laundry, which pissed him off, and he either shot her or stabbed her to death. It's unclear. Different things say both. Either way, he killed his mom for asking him to help her with the laundry. Now, he was sent to the Idaho State Penitentiary as an 11-year-old child, put in general population with all of the adult criminals. and kept there for 9 years till he was 20 years old. And how they kept him in line was they let him play on the prison baseball team if he behaved himself.
I cannot stop.
I swear. And I have a picture of him. I will post it on our socials because he is a baby.
That is wild.
And they have his picture up at the state pen when we go. I'll show you. They talked about how he had anger issues. So he played on the prison baseball team as a reward for when he was on his best behavior.
God, that just shows how immature he was.
They also described him after he killed his mom and was sent to an adult fucking prison with a whole bunch of murderers and psychopaths in the early 1900s. His disposition was sullen and stolid, and he showed no signs of feeling or remorse.
That's because he's a psychopath in the making.
And he's terrified. He's 11.
Okay, but I can't feel that bad for him. He killed his mom over laundry.
Yeah, no, I mean, clearly it was a poor choice.
Well, yes, I should say so. At the very least, it was a poor choice.
When he got this conditional pardon, he had been out for 4.5 years, and Governor Moore said that he was a different man now, and he wanted the opportunity to take on the responsibility of a home, and that he could not do this as long as he had the cloud of his crime hanging over him. So this is before they had any kind of confidentiality about juvenile delinquents and such.
Or any place to put juveniles who committed these serious crimes.
Correct.
And deal with them.
And also, he was not the youngest. He was not the youngest.
Who was the youngest?
Child sent. The youngest child was a 10-year-old boy. And I don't remember his name. I want to see, actually, if I can find enough information on him to do a whole episode on him, because I think it would be fascinating. But he's a 10-year-old boy who lived in Soda Springs, and his dad owned a bar. And his dad got into a fight with a patron, and his dad said, "Go get my gun." And the 10-year-old ran and got the gun, but then thinking that he would help his dad even further, he shot the patron his dad was fighting with, and the patron died. So he got sent to the state pen for, I think he was sentenced to 11 years or something. He's 10 years old. And the warden at that time, and I can't remember when this was, the warden at that time thought 10's too young to be in general population. So he let the boy live in the warden's house with him and his family.
And flypaper Lida to create one big, happy family. God, it's bizarre. What a long ways we have come.
Yeah.
So that is the story of the murders of Diane and Alan Johnson. We want to thank our new patrons this week: Melissa Walters, Nancy Collins, Christina Wilson, and Yakora Daniels. Thank you so much. We're excited to have you.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed hanging out with us.
And if you did, please like and follow wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you are interested in sponsoring the show, you can email us at ghostsandgarnets@gmail.com. And if you would like to become a patron, we are on Patreon. There is a link in the show notes. It says support the show, and it'll take you right there. You can check it out. You get all kinds of cool stuff when you subscribe. So thank you so much for listening, and we will see you next week with the non-murdery situation.
See you next time.